We proudly continue our March of the Machines with this Monster Monday, the best way to start your week. Now I understand my mechamorphs aren't the biggest hit on the channel here, but I have one or two more in the tank that I just want to round out with, such as this week's cybernetic spider speedster, Silk Road. If you could do me a quick favor, go ahead and like the video. If you want to do me an even bigger favor, subscribe to the channel as well. Whether you do or don't, I'm going to get into the design of our dangerous dame here. Transformers has a bit of history of spider-themed babe bots, starting with the infamous Black Arachnia, but continuing these days with the likes of Arachnid. This is my addition to that proud lineage, though a bit less blatantly named as Silk Road. This is a skirmisher type character that I've had rolling around in my head for a while, and am eager to share. In addition to her spider theming, Silk Road is a speedster that makes use of snares and poisons to get ahead of her competition, which was the driving focus behind her whole design. I'm still somewhat linked to the vehicle for building these mechamorphs, and Silk Road's Rally Racer alt mode is based on the level 6 Rally Jammer from Starfinder 1st Edition, both vehicles meant for competitive racing. This level also puts her at a good range for her partner, who we'll be seeing next week. Before that, we obviously have to discuss our lovely leggy lady here, who is built with the mechamorph robot and tech traits. Silk Road is a racer extraordinaire with excellent reaction time and agility, which is represented by her dexterity in between high and extreme. Pathfinder suggests to be a little cautious on using extreme values for low-level monsters, but ability scores aren't super impactful outside of design guidelines, so I did feel safe leaning towards it here. This is followed by a high charisma score, since, as a racer, she is a performer, and she also wants to misdirect foes from her traps and tricks. Her strength is moderate based on her being a giant robot, while her remaining ability scores are varying flavors of low. Now despite this low wisdom, I wanted her to use a high perception. Getting into some background for the character, Silk Road excels at navigating and overcoming traps and obstacles in her races, and part of that is noticing them before others do. She's armed with a host of skills, and at the forefront of these are going to be her dex-based and movement-related skills. In this case, she has a high acrobatics to tumble through enemies, and then a high piloting to better operate in her speedy alt mode. She's also a tricky customer with a high deception, who attempts to hide her unsavory tactics. A moderate racing lore makes her familiar with its legends and their exploits, while a moderate stealth is based on her dexterity and her sneakiness. Then, she has only a low crafting, as she's only recently started to learn how to make her snares, and they're mostly made by her partner, who you'll see next week. Let's hit the turn and cover these defenses fast and furious. Quick as Silk is, she uses a high armor class, but she's not as durable, operating on only a moderate pool of hit points. We do get some extreme numbers when it comes to her saving throws, which features an extreme reflex save, helping her evade any traps that she might actually trigger, but terrible fortitude and will saves, given the shared value of her con and wisdom. Both of these saves being terrible lets her build for moderate rather than low HP. Rolling right into attacks, I find myself, once again, using the same attack bonus for all of Silk Road's strikes. As slick and skilled as our speedster spider is, she uses a high attack bonus, but her attacks aren't particularly devastating. In melee, she brings her multiple legs to bear as an agile and finesse weapon with reach that deals moderate slashing damage, though she can also stab with it for piercing damage instead. Her ranged venom pistol is also moderate damage, and features her crippling toxin. At the mention of that, this poison uses a moderate DC, as most poisons I design do, based on my personal experiences with toxins in my home games. My poor players. This isn't a terribly lethal poison, with it instead having a focus on slowing foes, and letting Silk Road pull ahead on the track. Her final weapon, if you can call it that, is an Arachnid classic, the Web Strike. The alternate trait lets her use this in her vehicle mode as well, but it doesn't deal damage. It just locks an enemy down for her to run around and pick apart at her leisure, unless they succeed at escaping from a high DC. using a higher value than usual since this merely immobilizes rather than leaving the target grabbed. It's tough to say where to start when it comes to talking about Silk Road's abilities. I want to give a brief mention to her own speed, which is decently high, given her theming, and I think following that up with Uncanny Climber is a good call. This is an ability seen on a few other creatures, and it simply plays into her being a spider who is able to use her blade legs to anchor herself into a surface while climbing without having to use her hands. We'll roll from there into some of her other passives, such as Subtle Shooter. This allows her to feint at range or in melee to take advantage of her high deception, and mainly give her some extra action options. In addition to her web traps, Silk Road has some snares, and furthermore works with a character who makes considerable use of such items. To that end, she has the Opportunist ability. This triggers whenever a creature is affected by a snare or trap, whether it be a successful attack or a failed save, causing them to become off guard to her for 1 round. On top of that, she treats immobilized creatures as off guard, which does make her web trap deadlier, but specifically and only for her. Moving into her activated abilities, I think it's probably best to start with her Plant Mine action. This is 2 actions and allows Silk Road to stride or tumble through, if she's in robot mode, or move if she's in her alternate mode. When she does so, she can leave behind a web mine snare in any single square that she passes through. Slick and quick as she is, creatures observing her have to make an extreme DC perception check to notice her leaving behind these snares, which I've included in the sidebar. They are pretty simple snares with a DC based on their level, exploding into webbing that entraps those who step upon them. As a single action, I did want to make her blade legs a little bit more pertinent in her design, as that was kinda lacking a little bit. So, following the Monster Mash, we granted her the Stabbing Legs action. With its Flourish trait, it's pretty much just flurry of blows, but limited to her extraneous limbs. Nice and simple. That leaves us with 3 remaining abilities. 2 of them are related, and one of those is the standard for my marvelous mechamorphs, Convert, the ability that allows them to transform from one mode into another. However, Silk Road is slightly unique by virtue that her Convert ability is a single action, to represent her practice swiftness. Related to this is Momentum, which is an action that she can take after moving in her vehicle mode. This is pure action compression, letting her convert into robot mode and step 10 feet as part of this single action. This also calls to mind a couple scenes where you'll see a transformer driving, only to convert and use the speed they've built up to go a little bit further in their robot mode. Speaking of stepping, our amazing arachnid automaton has the Def Dodge reaction. This is largely based on the rogue's nimble dodge, but befitting her nimbly bimbly nature, if the attack that she uses is against misses, she can immediately step, potentially putting her out of harm's reach and chewing up more actions from her enemies. Which was actually a point of concern for me. I didn't want to make Silk Road too fast that the PCs couldn't even interact with her, but following the Monster Mash, I think I hit the sweet spot for her design. Not to say the mash didn't have its own issues, but it wasn't that the players couldn't interact with her at all. They kind of just chose not to for a period. As I mentioned, Silk Road's alternate mode is inspired by speedy sports and luxury cars, though hers is a little less civilian and more race ready. There's nothing too crazy in the design of this vehicle, aside from its ability to take tighter turns with a successful check to pilot it, as most vehicles need to move their full length before they can turn. However, Silk Road takes it a step further with a bootleg turn, a maneuver to whip around and feed her foes her dust, leaving them dazzled or blinded depending on how they fare on a standard DC for this vehicle's level. Pump the brakes because we've reached the end of this race. This slick, spidery speedster seeks to snare and subvert saboteurs with sinister substances, swapping swiftly to subjugate the circuit. I fully understand it can be difficult to use these unique mechamorph characters, especially when we don't have Starfinder officially out. But I want to suggest that players should feel free to file off that unique trait and run them as drones, following the proud tradition of Transformers all the way back from Generation 1. In regards to more story-based encounters though, Silk Road does have some intention of working with another mechamorph I'll be making, but she can also fight on her own, and might be fun to use some chase rules for before the players manage to corner her and force her into a fight. I miscounted my Monday, so we got 2 more machines for this March before we move on to some Monster Hunter Wilds. Let me know what you think of Silk Road here and what other monsters or machines you'd like to see down in the comment. If you like what you see on the channel and want to see more, check out the Monster Monday blog, which is linked below along with the Twitter and Discord. Thanks for watching, and have a monstrous Monday.
Now shut up and drive.